and welcome to this session. We are going to speak during 45 minutes about rising cities, a very international session today. As me, for example, hosting this panel, Nicolas Négoce, broadcast journalist working for the BBC, originally from Guadeloupe and hosting this panel from Abidjan, one of my favorite cities in Africa. Abidjan is the economic capital of Ivory Coast. So with us today to discuss about rising cities, we have Madhav Pai joining us from India. Hi, Madhav, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
So Madhav, you are the executive director of the World Center for Sustainable Cities. And we're going to have a very interesting discussion today with you about rising cities. Also in this panel, Monika Bik, director Broadway Malyan Ltd, joining us from London. Hi, Monika.
Hello, nice to see and meet everyone.
Yeah, how are you? How is London?
Not bad. Well, it's got its challenges, as you know, as everywhere, but we're good. Thank you.
And also we have with us today Dori Nguyen, managing partner Utopia, joining us from Nepal. Hi.
Hi, I'm actually currently in quarantine in the UK. I got here last week.
Oh, yes, yes.
I'm also in London.
Welcome.
Normally I am.
Yeah, you usually based in Nepal. So, as cities across the Middle East and also Africa and Asia continue to grow, cities leaders are experimenting with different ways of how to develop the economy of their city. So let's start with you, Dori. What is your view about how to develop cities in Africa, Asia, and Middle East?
Yeah, that's a pretty I'll do my best. But I think that being a urban initiative for emerging cities, we're highly focused on bringing different and wildcard actors to the table together. And the intention is that it's not only one stakeholder's responsibility to be carrying out the building of the city. And what we seek to do is actually bring in the innovative lenses of entrepreneurs to the table to help essentially create low risk and interesting and disruptive ways of doing things, bringing it to the table and being able to quickly, rapidly iterate it in ways that are adaptive to that specific city. And we focus highly on emerging city contexts where some of the stakeholders have different relationships with each other. So for example,
and what is your ultimate goal? What is the goal of this?
Yeah, it's essentially building cities for the many, not just the few.
Madhav, let's go now with you about the situation in India. What can you tell us about the capacities of the cities to grow in India?
See, I mean, if you look at what has happened in India in the last 20 years, the top 15, 20 cities is where the economy has mostly grown. Most of the growth has been outside the primary municipal limit. So it's been sort of this, informal can be very rich, sprawling buildings and sort of informal housing in the form of slums and so there is so a lot of the growth has been outside primary municipal limits without very much planning. So the growth has been tremendous. Jobs have grown, the economy has grown very well, and the economy has grown really in these 10, 15 cities mostly of the country. All this growth also has created a lot of both social costs in terms of congestion, in terms of degradation of water bodies.
And also inequalities, I guess.
And huge inequalities, right? Huge inequalities. And, India needs to, we are going to about 12 million people will join the workforce every year till about 2030. right? So,
So, carry on.
so the problem, so our cities need to accommodate these jobs, right? So, and most of these jobs, like 80% of these jobs are going to be in cities. So, really finding ways to create these jobs in the cities is one of the biggest challenges. On the other side, what we are seeing is actually the economy is really growing with these very high end, automated, high paying jobs, right? Which are mostly driven with, you know, uh, mostly technical and other sort of finance, those kinds of jobs. So this is one of the biggest challenges. And then, so how do you actually ensure that this growth is happening in this huge context of climate change? We're seeing bigger shocks. So I think, and in India, I mean, the other unique thing about India is, we don't have the state. We have three levels of government: federal, state, and city. And the state governments are very powerful, but there is not that much devolution to the third level of government, which is the city. So we don't have mayors, and so it's a massive challenge of sort of cities trying to grow, and so it's primarily driven by business leadership, by by informal development, and so I mean, I think, and of course the economy has grown because education, etc., has been one of the strong points. So it's it's this, so that it's sort of in many ways growth that's mostly jobs led growth, cities struggling to provide infrastructure for accommodating these people who are coming to the city for the jobs, so
Thanks
which
for
is a
that.
good thing. Yeah.
We will come back a little bit later more on those issues that you are naming now. Let's go back to the UK with Monique. Monique, you have worked on several master planning projects also on these regions. What is your approach to urban design?
I think the approach will vary depending on the problem and the context. So what I'm mainly observing through our work is that the rising city, which is the topic of this panel, face varied challenges. A major one is the demographic change in the demographic patterns. So it's far more young people and far more old people. And then depending on location on the continent, that manifests itself with a very different challenges. Therefore, we have to apply it to the location. So when you have a lot of young population, like in African cities, that has its own benefits because you have more people in a working age population to be able to contribute to economic boom. But with that comes huge strain on more homes, more workplaces, more community facilities, which some of the countries with such expedited speed of growth can't deal with it. We've led the strategic plan for city of Luanda for 2030 vision, and Luanda is forecasted by World Bank to grow from, back in 2015 it was 6.5 million people, to nearly 30 million people by 2030. That is like building 3 Paris size of cities within Luanda over a period of 15 years. And that projected growth is actually being recorded. So how do you deal with it? Which a city was designed for 500,000 people originally. Infrastructure can cope with it. So these are the challenges in the countries which growing and where the youth is taking over. And then on the other side, you have Asia and you have Japan, or you have Singapore, which has a really aging population. And then all of a sudden, you have a different flip side of the coin, because you're looking at population where the much smaller pool of young needs to on their shoulders carry the weight of many old. So how do you challenge that? And it's really interesting, particularly in Singapore, how they're looking at this as an opportunity rather than problem. So they talking about longevity dividend, which means they enable communities through policies to extend their working and active age, which in effect long term will mean will be more spending power. That people will have more savings, and that will fuel the economy. So depending on location, that's very different approach you will take, and also where you focus your efforts, because the scale of the problem is so huge. Where do you start in a city of 6 million people living in a favela? You know, where do you start? How do you do it humanely and logically?
Monica, the example of Luanda, the capital of Angola, is really interesting for me as a journalist, a specialist of Africa. I have traveled in 16 countries on the continent, and I had to go to Luanda to cover the Africa Cup of Nations, but finally my boss decided that we couldn't go. Why? Because of the price of the housing. So Luanda is one of the most expensive cities in the world.
Correct.
In terms of housing. How people can cope with that?
Well, it's as I say, it's the scale of the problem is huge. So it's all about being able to derive methodology where you focus the little money you've got and the little energy and human capital to shift the problem. Where do you focus it? So we are great believers that the mobility and transport is the magic key opening up so many other avenues. So if you invest in the mobility corridors and you start inserting amenities within that, which means greater number of people have access to greater opportunities of work or amenities, etc. That then becomes the ripple effect, and what you couldn't actually kind of resolve on big scale, it becomes trickle effect and organically start helping. But even then, to decide, so we also work in Dar es Salaam on with the World Bank and the local government on the improvement of the bus rapid transport system, the land uses around it. Super interesting project, amazing story of success in Dar es Salaam. I mean, in peak hour, you have something like every 6 seconds, you have a bus coming. That's, even in London, you don't get that level of service in public transport. So, but then how do you have 30 stations along that route. Which one do you start now improving as a first station? Because they all landed in the middle of the low density, incredibly populated neighborhoods. So you need to spend money somewhere. You don't have for all 30. So how you develop methodology for the decision makers to say, right, this, if I put my money here, this is going to be the greatest benefit for the most people. So mobility for me is the big one, and stakeholders engagement, which is what Dori basically was referring to. You need to bring people on board with you. They need to get on a bus with you, and you need to engage them and make sure that they basically the power for change. And that's the only way through engagement.
Dori,
can I piggyback off of that? Oh, go ahead.
Dori, yeah, let's go back to you. I just wanted to know how do you do also to bring people to engage in the process of
I think I lost you, Nicolas.
Yeah, I was trying to understand, in your own experience, how do you do to engage the public to participate in the transformation of the cities?
Yeah, good question. So just to quickly piggyback off of what Monica was saying, I think the idea of collaboration is not new, and everyone has kind of this lens of course, we need to, especially in cities, be cooperating with all the different agencies and entities that operate there. But it's also about understanding the strengths of each of those actors. So like I mentioned earlier, for us, entrepreneurs are essentially the grassroots of private sector. They can quickly move, mobilize, and they just need a bit of support to kind of reach these other actors. So with their innovations, with their ideas, is there a way we can quickly get these into the hands of corporations who might have the resources to test and run, bigger iterations of their ideas. Also government who would be able to create a supportive policy environment to get it through, or even to really test. So we're thinking about cities as test beds for some of these ideas. Is there a way that they can create, even a small area of the city to test one of these ideas? So a lot of it has to do with modeling it. So, in order for government to take on any of these ideas, they want to see that it has maybe worked somewhere else. And this is where our network of city labs has helped, where we can say, hey, to the Kathmandu city government that we have our sister studio in Lagos who've been doing X, and they have been working with the chief of innovation coordination officer for with the Lagos state to iron out priorities of Lagos and feed that into our accelerator and other incubation programs of the City Lab. And so that then the entrepreneurs we work with, as well as our City Labs themselves, can start to respond to some of the issues coming out of the city. And so that kind of feedback loop is really necessary. And so creating these relationships with all these different stakeholders, and then with the government, with the public specifically, I think everyone is interested in kind of innovation in cities. And so the way the public engage is essentially being the users of these ideas. And the things that we're coming up with are not, as they're in line with our mission to improve the city for the many, not just the few. So there'll be, mobility, health, education services that are needed in the city. And so people participate in that, and then that provides feedback. And we, develop processes that make sure that the ideas are open to iterations and adaptation from there.
Okay, I think, Dori, that we have.
Can I add something to Dori? Sorry. I was just going to say, Dori, that I think it's really interesting to say that, so some people, to see is to believe. So I think benchmarks and real examples and teaming up cities or developments, it's the real story of success. Because if you don't have a point of reference, if what somebody is trying to sell to you, you've never experienced and you can't imagine, you are unable to perhaps sometimes push yourself to achieve that. And once you see it, oh, I can totally see this can work here. So I think that's a really fundamental it's a very good point. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's great. Thanks for that. Madhav, Dori has spoken a little bit about Lagos. When we speak about Lagos, one of the biggest cities in Africa, we always speak about the difficulties for people in terms of transport. You, Madhav, you really believe in public transport, but when we see also as India, we always think that it's chaotic. What do you have to say? How to change that? How to make it easier for people?
See, in a way, one thing about India is that a lot of the, two-wheelers are quite ubiquitous. A lot of people own motorcycles, and motorcycles in a way are, they're cheap, they are cost-effective, and actually now, as you look, Indian motorcycles are also actually very, very fuel efficient. And if we move to electric, the biggest challenge about motorcycles in a way is that they're not safe. Literally 40% of the people who use a motorcycle end up in some kind of literally 4 in 10 people actually have some kind of a big injury or a fatality. So one thing, one thing that we strongly believe is, our streets, right? And this is where the idea of the BRT, also bus rapid transit, our roads, they are designed for cars all over the world. And I think that needs to completely change. Our roads, we need to completely reimagine, our cities need to completely reimagine what roads or these public spaces are meant to be. They need to prioritize walking and cycling. They need to make sure. So, we call it the 40-40 principle, right? So if you have roads in the city should not be wider than 40 meters, right? Because if it is more than 40 meters wide, people can't cross, people who are young or old can't cross, you have to be Usain Bolt to run across 100 meters in 10 seconds. So, right? So then we say these 40 meters, 1/3 of that 40 meters needs to be dedicated for for public transport, right? For public transport priority. So buses are not stuck in traffic. 1/3 needs to be left for walking and cycling. And then the remaining 1/3, the rest of the traffic can use, right? This is the ideal scenario that we talk about, because the only way, we can make our cities move is if we prioritize public transport. Otherwise, we are at 7 kilometers, 8 kilometers an hour. And now, it is impossible. This is when, a city like Mumbai, where there is only 3% people actually have cars, the speed in the peak hours is 7 or 8 kilometers per hour.
So, that's why, Madhav, that you, for example, you have chosen bicycle. It's better for you. It's easier. Because I know that you are always in the streets of Mumbai with your daughter Alia using your bicycle. So it's better for you that people follow your example.
Absolutely. See, I mean, I think more than 70% of the trips are less than 5 kilometers. They are very easy to use by bicycle. And the long commutes can be done on public transport. The whole thing is that we have to reimagine the roads today, whether it's Africa, whether it's the United States. If there is a road, 90% of that road is captured by cars, and that's the death knell of our cities, right? I think, and that particular thing has to completely change. And so, these, like the bus rapid transit movement that has happened over the world over the last 15, 20 years, the big push on bicycling that we have seen a lot in Europe, North America, and slowly reaching our cities. So I do think that it's not just about public transport, it is about reimagining the road, right, which is a public space, to be much more democratic, to be much more equal.
Madhav, sorry, go ahead.
I was just something interesting you said about the streets for all and living streets and all that movement, which is really global now. I think it's very much so heightened by the outcome of pandemic, because it's all now about walkability and where can you get within your hour allowed out, and how quickly you can get to your park because you have an hour for exercise in your curfew hours and all this. But what I'm finding, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but when we do work in rising cities in Middle East in particular, there is definitely a lot of talk about this now. It's far more appreciation. So it's the silver lining of the pandemic, if you like. However, what we're observing is that the policies and the regulations are not quite in tune with where people want to go. So we would be the most common, every master plan repeating conversation is, I want the really street cute and cuddly, and I want them narrow and for pedestrians and kids playing safely. And then we go to the planning authority and we apply what we call right of way, which is the dimension, the narrowest dimension for the road, which is acceptable to local municipalities. And we ended up with highways going through neighborhoods. And the rest of the master plan is a battle to reduce it in size. So there is a definitely shift towards it, which I think is heightened by pandemic. But I think our policies and our old manuals are slightly behind the curve. So that is the thing which will have to change to enable what you were advocating.
But just to add to that, and I think this is where but one of the things is that roads in many places are already there. You actually don't need more roads. It is about reusing the road. So it doesn't need more new dollars, right? The old investment can be reutilized. And now, especially using the pandemic, using these methods of what we call tactical urbanism, is putting ropes and paint and remarking the streets is a way. So, it's a way of getting people participation also. So you go overnight and you do these few things. And, we've done some of these things in Mumbai. You go overnight, you mark, you put ropes, you put paints, and suddenly people start to imagine how this street can be reused. And you leave it like that for 2 weeks. And if people accept it, and it's a way of it. So you're prototyping something with temporary materials. And if people like it, then you just make it permanent. And, New York, in a lot of ways, the big transformation in walking and cycling that it did over the last, between 2007 and 2012 was all through temporary, these kind of temporary.
I think that is possible in refurbished cities, which obviously the scale of challenge is slightly different. I was more referring to the cities from scratch. When you get the piece of desert and you have no context and you have to lay everything from the scratch, that's where those policies of, I want this, but it says a square peg in a round hole. We want this, but we can only do that because we won't get sign off. So, but yes, in a retrofitted, I think you are very right. It's that I think Calgary does a lot of that too, that they will test something for, particularly around cyclists, for a very short period of time, couple of weeks, as you say, and then something which public would say is absolutely unacceptable becomes acceptable and then becomes absolutely embraced. So those acupuncture interventions are really interesting to observe around the world.
I think the COVID point that you brought up, Monika, is also around kind of we have to be careful that it doesn't kind of sway too much in one or the other direction. So in one direction of focusing too much on private modes of transportation, and essentially then lowering the amount of service available for more safe and accessible mass or alternative transportation options. And, you know, and so middle ground of this would maybe be shared ride hailing apps, which are becoming quite popular all over the world, and they may see lower traffic, but I feel there might be still a steady stream coming from the middle class. So that, as in, they'll still be using it, but not at the similar frequency. But then I think where the kind of like inclusion or exclusion will really come into play is whether the mass transportation is going to be available, and things like, you know, infrastructure that we've seen, I think, a lot in Europe, and in terms of really pushing forward the alternative transport agenda is great, but then in rising cities, it's not so much, like you're saying, there's not much policy in place to really push these things forward. Exactly. And then there can be too much of a focus on, well, we need to keep it safe, so let's ensure that the private modes of transportation are supported. But those are, as you're saying, Madhav, a very, very small portion of people actually moving in the city. And as things become increasingly remote and the economy starts to support that, those who have the private transportation are in the least need to move. And so those who are at the bottom of the economy, if you will, are the ones that need, they will have not remote options for working, and they have to move. And so how does, I would be curious to see how that affects migration, because ultimately, you know, there is this trend of people reverse migration out of cities, but then at the same time, where's the tipping point of that? At what point are people going to reassimilate into rural areas? Are rural economies going to be supported to actually create jobs? And if not, and likely they might be saturated at a certain point, there will be this re-return into the city. And we're already seeing that in Nepal. And the re-return to the city might then mean that they need to come closer and closer if the transportation options aren't available. For them to move. And then there you might see the increase of congestion around slums and informal settlements as well.
It's interesting you say that.
Dori, before we carry on, I think that we have a little problem with your mic. Do you guys hear the noise when Dori speaks? No, or it's just me?
I think you have to stop moving your hands. It's move your hands. It picks up some sort of a noise.
No, I think that it's just the mic touching your necklace. That's all.
Oh,
so
okay. Maybe
a little bit.
Maybe I'll just take it out.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's cool. Because every time you speak, unfortunately, we have the eternal noise. Yes, Monika, you wanted to say something, to add something to that?
I was just relating to what Dori was saying about we're looking also the project of Reimagine Village in the UK, because what you just described, although it doesn't fall under rising cities topic, it is actually happening here when you have the sprawls of big communities growing in just outside commuter belt in to London, and then what are they offering except for housing? You know, a couple of schools, and how this work-shift balance needs to change, and new trending in the way how people work, and what's the correlation between the city and those kind of satellites around it. It's a quite complex topic, actually.
Madhav, you disappeared. Are you still with us?
Yes, yes, okay. I am.
So I have a question. I have a question for the three of you, especially Dori, because Dori, you have been pulled into big projects like cycling infrastructure. We've been speaking about the importance of roads and all that, and people can use car or people can take bicycles. But do you think that the population in Middle East or Africa or Asia is ready for that change? Because when you see only the capital of France, Paris, with the mayor Anne Hidalgo trying to make the world better, easier for people who want to use their bicycle, it's really being a hustle for it. It's not being easy. So do you think that in Africa, Middle East, and Asia, people are ready to abandon their car, to abandon public transport, and to use bicycle, for example?
I guess I can take this first, but I'd also love to hear what Madhav and Monica think about this. Personally, I'm also a cyclist. I also cycle everywhere in Kathmandu, and I do this kind of interesting personal, not at all scientific kind of data collection where I count the number of cyclists every time I'm out, and I log that into, I just use the Strava app, and so I just add it to my notes. And I also count the number of, but even during happened in Kathmandu, they actually did not allow vehicles out during lockdown periods, and as a result, more and more buying cycles, and this extended to the population, where I'd say the population beyond which their only means of transport is, and so that was even as the lockdown eased, you saw more and more cyclists on the road, which was great. But actually, we had been doing, we did some work with one of the municipalities on creating site infrastructure and struggled to find users and to really understand the behavior of cyclists in the city. But then, which was only several months before the lockdown hit, and then as the lockdown came in, there was actually some experimental cycle infrastructure, which is basically unprotected lanes in a major road in the city, and I think, you know, in my limited and our limited ability to experience what's been happening, obviously we're still in the middle of the pandemic, there is an increasing number of cyclists hitting the roads, and so what we're hoping is that, you know, it's a bit of a push towards, you know, first of all, seeing more people. It's the visibility is so important. If people don't see people like them cycling, it's very difficult to get them out. The perception of safety, so with the lowered amount of vehicles, hopefully that will help. And then that all spirals into where there is visibility and more use, there will be a stronger case to create protected cycle infrastructure. So, and that then leads to more use and more safety and safer road usage. Because as some of you may know, there's a tendency of private vehicles to do whatever they want on the roads, and so without the protected infrastructure, it's a little daunting for especially new riders to take it up.
Okay, Monica.
Well, I might look at the topics through maybe Middle East to give a slightly different angle to that, because the major issue over there obviously will be the heat. So no matter how much you might sometimes want to cycle when it's 42 or 45 degrees, you might have to be a very fit person to get through. But since I've been working for 15 years in Middle East, and both creating master plans from communities from scratch and also improving existing communities, what we observe is all about perception and where you taking people from and to. Because if you could be cycling along the same stretch of 500 meters, which could be lovely thought through cycle lane along the highway, and your point of reference, you have no reference, so you're just cycling along the 6-lane highway, that will always feel like you've been there for eternity. If you now take people through the places where there is activity, where there is a visual interest, that makes the journey feel much shorter and much more acceptable. And you also have to think about shading. So in Middle East, the key to success of cycling is thinking about how you shade, and that doesn't mean you have to build some huge shading structures. You use trees, canopy trees in the right way, so you don't plant everywhere palm trees which don't give you shade. You use right species, and therefore you lower the perceived temperature, and you route your cycling routes through the places where people actually have reason to go to and from, because it will be about shorter stints of journey. And the perception that it's always hot there is also false. There are plenty of months in a year where it's actually pretty lovely climate, and you could see it that if it's implemented in the right way, people do it. So you just have to obviously change the angle of problem because it's slightly different. And then you can achieve the much greater cycling numbers.
Madhav?
I mean, it's like I completely agree with both the points that Dori and Monica. Just adding to that, see, one is our cities don't have very much money. Okay, so and the thing is, if we invest in highways or if we invest in fast roads, we're just going to create more congestion. It's not going to solve the problem of mobility or traffic. So instead of actually creating the economic return on your infrastructure investment, you are creating social costs, right? So that is one point. And this actually has to be communicated to these political leaders, the business leaders. A lot of times the push to build more highways and roads comes from the business leaders. So actually educating them, bringing them along. So I think there is an important function of actually showing that investing, and not, that's what I'm saying, not just cycling, but investing in walking, cycling, and public transport will actually, be better for your city. Both it will create a bigger economy, it will create more jobs, it will create more access. So I mean, actually making this business case, it's clearly a political fight, right? So you have to fight it like a political fight. You have to build the coalitions that Dori is talking about. You have to find champions who will then promote the cause, like political champions, and you have to really reach the big business houses, because they are also the ones who are more used to their cars and their luxury. So I think it is really, and a lot of times you have to do all of these things in parallel, some led by civil society, some led by the political champions who actually see this vision. And I think, and then you get that tipping point. There are cities like Bogota is a great example of sort of suddenly there's 250 kilometers of bicycle lanes and the whole city is bicycling, right? And so I think I think that fight, it's a fight. It's almost like a campaign, a political fight
Yeah.
that I think we need to foster in our cities to make that transition of change. And all of these elements have to happen, right? That is, protected bicycle lanes, shaded bicycle lanes, all of those kinds of things. Technical
You
things
are
also need to
right.
happen.
It's often seen the big city which make the big changes because it came from the really inspired leadership. Somebody had a really hot for cycling or smart ways of managing public spaces or whatever. And that makes actually a big difference. It has to come from leadership. It's true.
Okay, so now, Dori, I would like you to share with me, can you share with us an experience about an urban innovation system, that a recent project that you are worked on and has been successful? Dori?
Sorry, Nicolas.
Dori?
It's my connection here, but
Yeah.
I lost the last bit of what you were saying.
Yeah, so I was asking Dori because it's like I can't. Is Dori still Dori? Yes. So can you explain to us how successful was one of your urban innovation ecosystem project?
I don't know if you all can hear me, but
Yes, now yes.
Okay. I'm really sorry, Nicolas. Can you please repeat that again?
So my question is, because now we are almost at the end of the panel, I just would like you to share with us concretely how successful was one of your recent projects in terms of urban innovation ecosystem. Do you have an example to give us?
Yeah, so I mean, I think success is really quite difficult to measure in cities, especially when we're trying to have large-scale change. But I will say that, so we predominantly work on developing in-house as well as supporting external entrepreneurs and startups to scale solutions that improve the city for the many. One of the in-house ventures that we've been working on is around circular economy, circular waste. And that came about because of a fair amount of actors within the waste ecosystem in Kathmandu becoming kind of coming together around these main issues and seeing that, well, there's some working in collections, some working in upcycling and all this, but there isn't kind of a coordinated effort and a circular effort, really a system-wide effort to disrupt the waste kind of the linearity of waste. And so what we've done is we've done a lot of research over the last year plus, and have been building a hypothesis around circular waste, and essentially examining the different kind of nodes along the waste journey, and are creating a venture around first actually supporting some of the waste ecosystem actors. So we recognize that there is a saturated system who focus on collection, who focus even on transport and transportation, transport and transfer stations of waste, but essentially that some of these actors could use very disruptive ways, I guess, of thinking and looking at the systems. And so what we're doing is building a venture that supports that and then identifies where along the ecosystem, where along the supply chain there is a gap. So our hunch at the moment is that there's a gap between increasing the value of certain materials, low value or no value materials in the waste supply chain. So this is your soft plastics, foam, and these materials. And how we might actually create value for them and then create a new use so that they're actually injected back into the economy as new materials, and don't create a burden on natural resource extraction, further natural resource extraction, which is all mostly imported in Nepal. And so, so it's ongoing work, but the intention is that here we're working with all these different stakeholders and actors along the supply chain to help them first improve and strengthen their models, and that creates the platform and stronger supply chain for us to later come in as an actor that starts to close that loop back. Not sure if that was clear to everyone, but yeah.
Yes. Madhav, some say that the pandemic provided much needed reset in the way business is done. What is your view about that?
I mean, I would fully agree. I mean, what is very clear, I mean, is that I think given sort of how badly the economy is impacted, I think inequity is going to increase. Especially if you look at the hospitality sector, or a lot of these sort of all of those jobs have become more and more, are less and less salaried jobs and have become more and more contract jobs, people paid on commission and things like that. We've seen this whole proliferation of platforms like Uber and others, again, taking, so I think, so there is one big thing, and I think that is going to continue to grow, is, there are going to be fewer higher paying jobs and lots of sort of very informally contracted jobs. And I think this is going to be, I mean, I think the pandemic has just sort of significantly made this worse. And I think this is going to be the biggest challenge to fight over the next 20, 30 years. Having said that, I mean, I think the few good things that has happened, one, we have clean air. I mean, I haven't seen blue sites like this in Mumbai in the last 20 years. Water bodies, rivers are cleaned up. And so, but, I mean, we have to wait to see if this is temporary, because it is clear that people realize that it is possible to do it. So the hope is that, people are willing now to adopt solutions, adopt, things, but we really have to innovate and create the business case for it, because clearly the economy is so badly hit that it's going to take, I don't know how long to recover. And in that interim, I think the inequity will just continue to increase. And I think, how do we provide then social security? How do we provide safety nets, healthcare, education? I mean, there are people, I personally know people who have taken their kids out of school because they can't pay their tuition fees, their fees. And I mean, so so I think this is, so I don't know if it is the reset that was needed. It was good for the environment, but I think for a majority of the people who it's terrible. And we really need to at least think about, I mean, given the rising inequity, I think cities and countries need to more and more think about safety nets, and for like safety net strategies for urban residents, because in India, for example, there is a rural employment guarantee scheme. So if you're living in a village, you at least are assured 100 days of work and some money. But if you're living in a city, you have nothing. So I think urban safety nets is hopefully one innovation that needs to emerge out of this pandemic for the world.
Thank you. Monica, you have worked on some of the largest master planning projects in the Middle East, Africa, or Europe. What can you tell us about how difficult it was to work on those new quarters in Sadr City in Baghdad or Abu Dhabi and Jordan, for example?
Oh, wow. We should have another session on this. It's definitely not going to be a 5-minute answer, but they all come with different baggage of problems and different set of opportunities. So you always embrace what's the best about them. I would generally split our project into 2 categories. You're either dealing with far more context and richer setting, but therefore much more difficult and slower pace of change. So how do you retrofit cities which facing challenge? So Sadr City in Baghdad was a great example of that. It had not only a turbulent political times, there's all sorts of troubles within the district, and it was designed for a small population and was housing, enormous amount of people. So all this condensation of people create all the problems. How we deal with that and how we deal with politics? There was one set of challenges similarly in Angola. I would say when you work in those cities which go through transformation, you almost have to put more often political hat on, not a designer hat on. So we often were in the meetings where we're presenting to cabinet of ministers, and your language and your vocabulary had to significantly alter because the audience, yes, holistically has the same interest at heart, but actually speaks very different language. So we always had to adjust to the audiences we talk to. And when you look into the Middle East, I think often the challenges that and also actually in Jordan, the scale of need, how quickly, because there's so many people in young age needing homes and schools, etc. The speed of delivery of that is a problem. And good cities are cities which go over time and give the pattern of time, and people can inhabit them and change them. If you're rolling out city for 500 hectares of 70,000 people over a period of 10-15 years, that will come with its own bag of challenges, because you basically kind of manufacturing the city in a very short period of time, but you kind of need to do it because there is a need for housing. So it really depends on you're either politician or designer, and then you go to talk to people and you learn. We did quite a lot of workshops to learn about, when we talk home, what home means to me is very different what home means to Emirati family or Saudi family, where on average it could be 8-12 people in a household. That is, in my household, is significantly smaller, so I would design house differently. And also how people live and what the priorities are. You really have to have a lot of workshops and talk to people to find the angle and the language, and then try to pioneer the change through the right vocabulary. I thought, for instance, in Dar es Salaam, one of the biggest challenges was to explain that we cannot all have a 2-story house in the city center. We all want that, no matter where you are in the world, we all want that, but we cannot have it because that leads to the sprawl. And we did this really interesting exercise when we gave the group of people that were mainly planning department and government officials and some other kind of people from the sphere, when we gave them a set of Lego with lots of yellow blocks, and we show them where the metro station is and the line goes through, and we say, you need to now build your ideal neighborhood around this investment. You just spend all this money building this train station, and now put me all these pieces in. And they start all going very slowly, building these 2-story lovely things with schools and parks. And then we was 10 minutes to the end of the workshop. We said, what about the rest of the yellow? That all has to fit in on this block. And within 15 minutes, they all got the concept that you have to go vertically to some degree to be able to accommodate and to be able to make sure that most of the people, more people have a benefit from your investment. So it's using different tools to get very complex and often for a layperson boring topics across to understand how you implement those changes and where the small change makes a big impact.
Thanks so much, Monica. So it's the end of this panel about rising cities. We have spoken about three very important points, I think. Time and organization, good planning. Also, we have spoken about the importance of the engagement from the population. The population has to be part of the process when you want to transform a city. And we spoke also about to make public transport a priority, the difficulty of some cities where you have maybe too much cars, how you encourage people to use bicycle or to use public transport. And you also mentioned at the end, Monica, the fact that not everyone can live in the centers of city. So thanks so much, Monika Bik, based in the UK, for joining us today. Also, Dori Nguyen, quarantined in the UK, but we are very happy to have you today with us. And Madhav Pai from Mumbai in India. Thanks so much, everyone, for taking part in this panel.